The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. And thank you for everyone who is tuning in, especially at the end of a work day. I appreciate you taking some time to learn with me. So I'm going to share my screen. Let's see if I do this in. All right, can you see this in full screen? I can't see anyone. If someone can just.
It's not in full screen.
It's not in full screen. Okay, we're gonna have to look at it this way. Something's going on. I'm not quite sure with my computer. But so today we're going to talk about the two sides of inclusion. First, a little bit about me. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I acknowledge that the territory on which I live was once occupied by the Cherokee, the Catawba, and the Congaree. I am a Black woman. Today, my hair is in two curly ponytails. I'm wearing a blue top. And if you don't remember anything else about me, I want you to remember that I'm obsessed with inclusion. I'm obsessed with making our world more inclusive, one person at a time. Now, as we're on this slide, I want to ask some questions about why is this the information that I've included here? So let's start with my pronouns. Let's use the chat. Any thoughts around why I've included my pronouns here? Yeah, I'm identifying myself. What else? What else am I doing by telling my pronouns? Well, I am also showing allyship to people who use pronouns that maybe are unexpected or maybe they use they, them, right? But as an ally, I often start out by sharing my pronouns to make this practice more common so that as I am comfortable sharing my pronouns, that people around me will be comfortable sharing their pronouns, and we can get into the practice of not assuming about one another, but putting that information out there to identify ourselves. All right, what about my territory acknowledgement? Is this something that you have heard or seen before? And why do I have that here? Okay, Mauricio has seen it. Yes, so this is to acknowledge the fact that there were people here long before, that's right, Rolf is right on it. There were people who were here first, long before any of my ancestors were here, right? So yes, it's really about acknowledging and showing respect. All right, and then finally, I have a visual description here. What is the reason for the visual description? Yes, accessibility, that's right. So when I enter a space, I don't know who's attending. I don't know if there is someone who is visually impaired, or maybe perhaps if someone is on, the phone in their car and they can't see me. So visual descriptions make sure that everyone knows who is presenting. And as was mentioned in the chat, it's really about accessibility. So what I've done in just these three things is I've started to show you how inclusive leadership works, which is what we're talking about today. We're really talking about how inclusion works. It's, works two ways. And I'm a huge proponent that small steps make a big difference. And that's why I named my business the Everyday Inclusionist, because I want to teach people you take small steps every day to build up your muscle as someone who is practicing inclusion. And these are some of the ways that you can do that. So really quickly, I just want to talk about some guiding principles in the work that we should keep in mind as we are meeting today. And the first is we want to be comfortable with the uncomfortable. This work of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging is extremely uncomfortable. It's very sensitive, right? We are talking about identity and we're talking about oppressive systems, right? And so in order to move forward, we really need to be comfortable with those things that give us discomfort. And that includes also seeking curiosity over certainty. Listen, we are certain beings, right? We're sure, right? There are things that we know without a shadow of a doubt. And a lot of times we can come into conversations feeling like we already know what we need to know. But I encourage you to be curious, to be open, to listen to the experiences of others as you are moving forward in this work. And that includes listening actively, right? Listening not to respond, but to really hear someone's perspective. It's understanding that this work is a marathon, not a sprint. I wish that we could fix and change everything that's wrong in a year, but we know that that's not going to happen. We are upending hundreds of years of oppression, and that takes time. I ask that you both lean in and lean out. So as we are talking with one another, that you show that vulnerability, that you're contributing and that you're also making space for others to contribute. It's okay to leave harmful conversations, and that includes this one. If you are having a conversation and you're part of a training and you experience harm, it is okay to leave, even if it's just for a moment to gather yourself, or if it's, I don't want to partake in this anymore. Just keep in mind that you don't have to stay somewhere that's hurtful for you. And then finally, learning how to respond when called out. And we'll talk about a little bit of that today. So I first want us to do an activity, and let's see. So we have 7 people here currently. I'm going to assign everyone a number. So Jenny, you're number 1. Arushila, you're number 2. Marie Louise, you're 3. Mauricio, you're 4. Rolf, you're also number 3. And Sierra, you're also number 4. All right. So what we're going to do is I'm going to give you an activity. Now, if we were together, we would get into groups, but I gave you all numbers. And so on the next screen, you will have a set of directions based on the number that I've given you. The goal is to finish this activity as fast as you can. So once I go to the next screen, you're going to start the activity. And then when you're done, I want you to just simply put in the chat the number that you were assigned. Right? And then we'll debrief. Okay. So get ready, get set, and go. Is everyone able to see the screen? And okay, I see some numbers coming in. All right. Got a 4, a 1, a 3. Okay. Okay, I've got a 2 that completed. Okay. Awesome. All right. So I want everyone to just for a moment take a look at the, yeah, I'm with you, Mauricio. Take a look at the instructions that everyone had. And so we noticed that people were completing this on different times, right? Because obviously there were different obstacles that people had to meet. Now, for anyone who was number one, that was straightforward. You just write your name, right? Participant number two, the instructions were in German. Number three was about using their non-dominant hand. And then number four was about counting the 60 first before completing the activity. So questions, was this a fair activity? I gave you all numbers and I gave you instructions. Was this fair? And then tell me why or why not. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, there was a language barrier. Now, LaRushula said, yes, we all had the same instructions, okay? And Rolf, you wanted a different number. Yeah, absolutely. Um, absolutely, right? Like if we don't speak English, number two could be hard. Now, we are in a technological age, right? So it's really easy to take that information and put it into Google Translate. But what I want us to glean from this activity is that we all have a degree of privilege, right? Some more than others. And so when we look at these instructions, we have sometimes, there are language barriers, right? So if you speak English as your first language, you have a privilege in this country, right? Let's look at ability and being able to move and write and talk. Those are things that give us privilege. And so as we think about people that have harder, that have physical limitations or physical barriers, right? And how difficult it may be for them to complete a simple activity. Or even if we look at neurodiversity. So if we think about counting to 60, think about people whose processing times are longer, or they have to, right? They process things in a different way. And I love this activity because it helps us see that, the work of diversity is not just about our skin color. It's not just about our gender, because that's where typically people go, right? They think about skin color, gender, sexual orientation, and gender identity. But there are so many other ways that we are diverse and we are different from each other. And the way that this can show up can be longer processing time, or it's going to take me, I don't speak English as a first language, so I have to interpret it in my brain and then, right, get that understanding. Or I have physical limitations, and so I have to learn how to do things differently or show up in a different way. And so I really want to know, how does this affect you all in the work that you do? How does this idea of privilege that we hold show up for you? And you can either unmute or use the chat, since there's not a lot of us here.
I'm sorry, Beth, could you repeat the question?
Yeah, how do you see your privilege showing up in your work?
I don't have my camera on, but I am a Caucasian male, so I don't experience, I would say, issues that are related to other ethnic groups. I can basically self-identify myself as a white male and literally have no like pre-concepts of there's someone, if there's trouble, or if there's something that I have to be aware of. Now, when I was growing up, my best friend was an African American, and he would always say, "Rolf, we need to walk on this side of the road and avoid these." And I didn't really pay attention at the time until I got older and realized the impact of, I would say, racism and things of that nature that I am not aware of. But having been an artist for the last 20 years and worked with people in all types of communities and befriended, it's really opened my eyes through the arts about my responsibility to acknowledge those groups and be respectful and value that I do have a certain privilege that not everyone has.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's good. Thank you for sharing, and thank you, for having that awareness, because it is important, Mauricio, thank you for your comment, that you're mentioning that, you're mentioning that you're light-skinned Latino. So there's some sort of maybe passing for you, right? Because you don't have to necessarily deal with exclusion that other people of color face every day. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, right. Like when I go out in the world, I'm able to walk up steps, right? I'm able to see where I'm going. I think that's definitely a privileged position that I'm in with the physical ability that I have. All right, so just a quick level setting as it comes to definitions, because these words are often used interchangeably. But when we talk about diversity is a fact. It is, like I like to call it, a noun, and it simply means all of the ways that we are different, which is what we've been talking about, right? So this is how we look, the things that we believe, right? What our culture is. That's diversity. If you have two people in the room, you have diversity. The next is inclusion, and inclusion is a verb. It is a feeling. And I like to define inclusion as the intersection between belonging and uniqueness. So inclusion says that you can be uniquely who you are and still belong. Inclusion says you don't have to assimilate. You don't have to cover up or pretend to be someone else in order for you to have true acceptance. And then equity is fairness. During the summer, my favorite Olympic sport, without a shadow of a doubt, is track and field. And so if you watch track and field, you'll see when there's longer races that there's a staggered start. You'll see in this picture here if you're looking at the screen. The reason for that is because the inside lanes are shorter than the outside ones. And therefore, the people on the inside would have an unfair advantage if they were all lined up at the same spot. So like equity is giving a staggered start. Everyone still has the same race to run. So if they're running around the track one time, that's 400 meters. Even with a staggered start, everyone is running 400 meters, but it recognizes that some people have an advantage over the others, and it's a staggered start to make sure that everyone has an equitable opportunity to win that race. Okay, so these are really the foundational elements of this work. We have diversity, which is a fact, inclusion is a feeling, and then equity is fairness. I want to talk about inclusion some more, of course, because it's what I'm obsessed with. But I also believe that this work starts with inclusion. A lot of people they say, they want to start with diversity. Let's bring in people who are different. Let's make sure we have that diversity represented. But if you haven't created an environment where those different people are accepted, where they're celebrated, where they're valued and seen, then you will lose them. And so I believe that the foundation of this work is inclusion, and inclusion will bring in the diversity. It will beget equity. And so, inclusion, again, accepting and celebrating our differences, not tolerating, but actually, I value you because you are different from me. It's where we're all working together to understand the biases that we have and to also mitigate those biases. Inclusion means we feel comfortable using our voice. We feel like our contributions matter. Not only that, but everyone has equitable opportunities to actually be successful, right? Sometimes I'll look at organizations and they'll say, well, Beth, we have great diversity, right? We have 50% women, 30% people of color. I'm like, great. What does your C-suite look like? What does your leadership team look like, right? Because it's not just about if they're in the door, but does everyone actually have an opportunity to get to the top floor? And then finally, inclusion means that people have access to the resources that will help them. So when we do have our differences, what are the things that we need to, again, be successful? So if we think about inclusion, I want you to think about a time when you felt like you belonged. Think about a time when you were included. And tell me, what did that look like? Y'all, my laptop is going a little bananas, and I apologize for that. So if you see things wonky on my screen, that's why. But tell me, what did it look like when you were really a part of an inclusive culture where you felt like you belong?
Hi, this is Rolf again. I would say the first time I attended a writing camp in high school, I was a junior. I wrote plays and really kept to myself. And a lot of my friends in the neighborhood were into sports, and I was always kind of would sit during basketball. I didn't really want to play. And so when I attended a writing camp, it was filled with artists and musicians, and that really geared me towards kind of a lifetime pursuit of the arts. Thank you.
I love that. Thank you for sharing. Yeah, so being around people with similar interests and goals, right? Jenny says, yep, on the stage as part of a storytelling group. Good stuff. I think those times when I see people who look like me is when I felt included. I've had many, so as a backdrop, before I started doing this work, I was in the field of insurance. And so if you know anything about insurance, right, it is very white male dominated. And so there were many times when I was the only person who looked like me in the room, or maybe I was the first person to be promoted to leadership or first person in a particular role. And that feels very lonely and isolating, right? So when there were people who look like me, definitely felt included. And Jenny also added, or when people think like me, right? So yeah, when there's that similarity that we have. And so, when people feel included, we know that it has a great, it's a great factor on their physical and mental health, that people are healthier when they belong. We were created to be in communities with other people. And there's all these statistics that help bring that point home. So when we think about an inclusive leader, this is someone who promotes these concepts at work or where they are, right? And they do that by leading by example and by really intentionally creating a culture where everyone has a sense of belonging. I like teaching this topic because when you first hear me say inclusive leadership, you might think, oh, is this only for this particular type of person? But I believe anyone can be an inclusive leader because this is the work of all of us, right? I believe that we all have a duty to promote diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, that we all have a duty to be intentional about creating cultures of belonging. And so this one quote I love by Tanya Luna says, leadership isn't saying, follow me, I'll take you somewhere. It's about what happens when you leave. And inclusive leaders leave every person and room better than they found it. So what we're going to do is we're going to just talk about what does that look like as an inclusive leader, right? What does that mean for me to role model this? And these are 5 qualities that we'll talk through. And I want to know, how could you apply this in your work as an artist? So the first is about interpersonal trust. It is finding that common ground with each other. So like we were talking about before, people who look like us or think like us or have common backgrounds, while also being able to value the perspectives that are different than our own. And so how does this play out in your work and your life as an artist? How do you build interpersonal trust? Listening, yeah. What else?
I'm a firm believer in a handshake and a big smile to kind of bridge the gap, especially when I walk into a room and I don't know anybody there. I tend to first, and this is just from years of practicing being in public and speaking, to take a deep breath and just make eye contact and smile. And usually I spend the first 5 minutes listening, as Sierra wrote in the chat. Thank you.
Yep, great. Yeah, letting people, listening and giving someone your time and your attention is an amazing way of showing someone like, hey, I'm trying to build this relationship with you, right? Attentive listening. I love it. All right, let's look at the next quality. So the next quality of an inclusive leader is that they integrate diverse perspectives. So they consider all points of view and the needs of others while not navigating conflict. So being able to integrate diverse perspectives. How do we see this play out?
I think it's about opening up conversations, instead of having one leader make all of the decisions, or people feeling that they're pressured into following in that rationale of whoever the leader is, or not feeling comfortable to speak, but having that open environment where they can communicate.
That's right. Yeah, people want to know that their opinions, that their thoughts and perspectives matter. And so how can you make sure that you are listening, like we talked about in the last step, but also implementing the things that you hear from people? Go ahead, Ralph.
Oh, yes. I would like to ask the group, and this has happened to me, especially when I've traveled, language barriers. How do you kind of provide? I was an instructor for about 4 years with computers, and taught various students from various backgrounds, and the language barriers seem to be one of the most difficult. So I kind of will ask the group for some advice on that topic. Thank you.
Good question.
I can jump in there, Rolf. That's an excellent question, and something that, I genuinely get a lot is, from folks who, in my case, who are learning Spanish, and, in their minds, they want to be perfect from the get-go. And what I remind folks is that, if there is that barrier that you feel that you cannot reach a certain community, just realize, at least from my perspective, is that folks see the effort that you put in to learn somebody's language. And another big part of that when learning language, I tell folks, is also to be learning the culture as well. So if they see you're trying to, your best, the words don't come out right, I don't even see that. I can fill those gaps of what you're trying to say. And if you're going out to the restaurants I eat at, you're purchasing stuff, you're trying stuff that's new, we do see all of that. And that's something that we really appreciate, that you have taken the time to kind of involve yourself in that specific culture. So I always try to be encouraging to folks when they try to learn Spanish, and that's basically where we come from. So any effort that you may feel is not enough, or you're not doing it well enough, just know that on the other side, we're looking at it as showing respect for our culture, and we appreciate that you're taking the effort to learn.
Such great advice, and so true, because language is a part of culture. And so how are you showing respect for the culture, including what you're trying to do to learn that language? Great advice. Thank you, Mauricio. All right, inclusive leaders are also able to motivate others and support their growth. So they're able to optimize talent, right? And so I think what's important in this talking point is that it's easy to motivate and support people who look like you. An inclusive leader is able to do this not just with people who look like you, but with people who are different from you. People who think differently or come from a different place, have a different perspective or a different background, right? Because if there's someone, if I'm mentoring someone and they're a young Black woman, right, who's a little chubby with natural hair, like I see myself in her, I can identify with her, and I'm like, yeah, I got this, right? But what about a young white male who maybe comes from a wealthy background? I should, as an inclusive leader, be able to motivate and support their growth as well, just as much as the person who is more similar to me. Inclusive leaders also apply an adaptive mindset, which I would guess as artists, you are very skilled at, right? But you're able to take this broad view and adapt the way that you approach problems, approach people, that you create solutions by leveraging those differences, right? There is a book that I read a long time ago, it's a business book called The World is Flat. And it was talking about how technology has really given us access to the entire world, 200 years ago, even 100 years ago, right? People did not have access to all of the information that we have. And so how are you able to to learn about people who are different, to learn about other cultures and other places, and use that broad worldview to really adapt how you approach life? And then finally, inclusive leaders are able to achieve transformation, right? So they're able to lean into that discomfort. Yes, Mauricio, by Thomas Friedman. Yep, thanks. They're able to lean into that, that discomfort, right? And they're able to bring about a transformation by bringing people along with them. When I think about this work and I think about leadership, one thing that I always hear from people is, I don't know how to have the hard conversations, right? People, this is where they struggle. And we know that's because our brains are built for comfort, right? Our brains are not built to to be challenged all the time. And so an inclusive leader is able, though, to meet the challenge. And that's because they have that worldview, because they know what their biases are, because they've worked on bringing people together from all backgrounds. Now, if you're like me, when you were growing up, you learned the golden rule, which is treat people the way you want to be treated. But I believe that we need to take it a step up to the platinum, which is treat others the way they want to be treated. And let me give you an example. So my father, anybody have an extremely difficult father to shop, or someone in your family it's really hard to buy Christmas gifts or birthday gifts or, a gift for, right? That's my father. He'll be 72 this summer and he has everything that he wants and needs, and it's really hard for me to figure out what to get him. Well, if I was following the golden rule, right, which is treat him the way I want to be treated, I would get him a manicure and a pedicure because that's what I like. That's what how Beth wants to be treated. However, my father doesn't like manicures and pedicures, right? And he has medical issues, which says he really shouldn't be going to a salon to, he has to go to the doctor and get his nails cut. So if we're looking at the golden rule, while I have great intention, the impact is that I'm going to probably give him something that he can't use and or could be harmful to him. So if I'm looking at the platinum rule, what I'm going to do instead, and this is what I did last Christmas, I got him a new laptop. His old laptop was old, right? He's a tech guy. I wanted to feed into that. So this is kind of a silly example, but when you're thinking about this work, I want you to keep in mind, I want to treat people the way they want to be treated, not necessarily the way I want to be treated. And how do we figure out how people, like what people need to be rewarded or motivated or to feel like they belong? How do we know?
I think most people usually tell you, like they will tell you or give you a hint of, I don't like this, I want this, I prefer, or they'll give you hints so that you know what they prefer.
Yeah, I mean, you're right on, right? It wasn't a trick question, y'all, I promise. It's really simple. There's two ways. You ask and you observe. So depending on the relationship you have with someone, it's really simple to ask, like, hey, what are the types of things you're into? What do you like? How do you like to communicate? What do you need to feel seen, right? Or like LaRushula mentioned, observing and seeing what people are doing for themselves or what they're talking about, what they respond to. And that's how you can really get to know, right? They can be intentional. Yeah. So, and I apologize because it's not in slideshow, I have to navigate a different way. But for the next 20 minutes, what I want us to talk about is the other side of inclusion. Because when you have this conversation about inclusion, it is often, this is how you can include others, right? This is how you can create a culture where people feel like they belong, where they can be unique, where they're valued. And this work is extremely important. I mean, it's my life's work, so I definitely think that it's important. However, I realized a few years ago that there's another side of inclusion that is often missed, and that is the way that we include ourselves. So with my work, I'm typically going in and I'm talking to organizational leadership and I'm telling them, make sure that people have a seat at the table, make sure that people are using their voice and that they have, their value is being recognized. And again, that still puts a lot of the control into their hands. And so I developed this concept called self-inclusion. And that is, okay, now how can you make sure that you get a seat at the table? That how do you make sure that you are using your voice and that your value is being seen and heard? And that's what this concept of self-inclusion is. So I'll tell you a little story. When I was younger, I grew up during a time where your coolness was decided by how well you dance. Anyone else with me? So like, If you danced good, you were part of the cool kids. Well, y'all, was not a good dancer. I'm still not a good dancer, right? I can keep a beat, but anything outside of a two-step and I look wild. Well, there was this boy that I grew up with in elementary school, and he'd have these awesome house parties, and there'd be a DJ and snacks, and it kind of looked like this a little bit. No smoke machine, right? But the lights would be dimmed, and so the girls are on one side of the room, and the boys are on the other, and the girls are waiting for the boys to ask them to dance. And I would get asked to dance, but then I wasn't a good dancer, so I would politely decline. And after a while, I stopped getting invitations to the party because I didn't dance, right? Like I wasn't a cool kid. So what I realized into adulthood is that I was still carrying that mentality around with me, where I was waiting to be asked to dance. I was waiting for people to make me feel like I belong. And the thing is, if you're waiting for somebody to say you belong here, to make you feel like you belong, you could be waiting for a long time, right? Because that may not always happen. And so I was actually tested on this a couple of years ago. I had a wonderful opportunity to go to an executive class at Harvard's Kennedy School up in Cambridge. And this was the class picture. I'm in the top right in a blue dress. And so we walk in on day one, and we're all going around, and we're, giving our introductions. And in this picture, you'll see people such as, there's a state legislator from New York. There are several police chiefs from around the country. The man who was the head of HR for the Coast Guard was in this picture. The woman who was the highest military personnel from the state of Maryland is in this picture. You have people, international CEOs from Nigeria and Ireland and China. And then you have me in my little blue dress. And at the time, I was a mid-level manager at a company. I was a single mom, and I'd never been outside of the country. In that first day, I said to myself, I don't belong here. I said, they made a mistake. This was not supposed to happen. And I remember I had a conversation with my best friend that night, and she reminded me, Beth, from the time I've known you, you've been waiting around for people to make you feel like you belong. And she was right. From that time, from those parties, I was waiting to be asked to dance. And so I came up with this concept of self-inclusion and a short framework, which I'm going to walk through really quickly. The first is that you inspect your own sense of belonging, right? And so this is really about asking yourself, am I putting myself in a position where I'm waiting for people to say, come on and dance? Or am I actually getting out on the dance floor and I'm dancing myself? Right? Who is that? Am I being active or being passive? And then after you make that determination, if you say, you know what, I have been passively waiting around, the next step is really about insisting on your own belonging. And this is really about the story that you tell yourself. So I know we have some storytellers here. I'm also a storyteller. I went to undergrad. My undergrad degree is in English writing, right? I love writing. I love stories. But oftentimes the stories that I tell myself are not the most pleasant ones. They're not the most positive ones, right? I remember telling someone, I think my dad was telling me, he was giving me some constructive feedback, and he was, being careful with that. And I said, Dad, there is no one that is harder on me than me. Like, you can never tell me anything that I have not already told myself in a much more harder, extremely difficult way, right? But I had to learn to change the story that I was telling myself because I was beating myself up. And so this insist is really about, yeah, I do belong. And here's the reasons why. And after you've insisted on yourself, it's really about igniting yourself to action. So we'll go back to the Harvard class. And, that day one, I was very intimidated by all of those people who were there. However, I should have told you all, this was a class on diversity leadership. And so I was there as a diversity leader, but most of the people who were there just representing their job, and they wanted to learn how to be an inclusive leader. And so we had homework every night. So I would do the homework. I would contribute in class. I'm talking with people. I am showing not only them, but myself why I deserve to be there. And I love this imagery of the matches, because when you take one small step, when you ignite yourself to action, it actually gives you the fuel to keep moving forward until you have more actions, right? Until now you're taking big steps, but you've got to believe in yourself, and then you've got to move. And then after that, it's about considering the impact you make. I had to be honest with myself, right? Like, I could not have gone to the general's office in Maryland and done her job. I couldn't have gone to the state legislator's office in New York and done his job, but I can do my job, and I do it to the best of my ability because I've trained, I'm educated, I've practiced it, right? This is what I am meant to do. And so I have a goal that no matter what room I walk into, I want to make an impact, even if I'm intimidated, even if I'm scared. And so with this class, I actually got work out of it, because as I'm talking with people, as I'm pouring into them, I am letting them see the value that I bring. And I got some work out of it as a consultant. So imagine day one feeling like I don't belong, and day 5 walking out with more clients in my pocket. And then the final step in self-inclusion is really about instructing others on how to treat you. And if you've been paying attention, yes, every step starts with an I. That's because I'm a word nerd and I love alliteration. But you want to then teach people how to treat you. And this is about having barriers, boundaries. This is about letting people know. We talked about it earlier, right? Like, this is what motivates me. This is how I like to communicate, right? And so, for example, I don't work on Fridays. I'm an entrepreneur. There's this old quote that I heard that said, I'm so happy I quit my 9 to 5 to work 80 hours a week as an entrepreneur, right? And so I had to come to a point where I said, Beth, you didn't quit your job to be more miserable, right? You quit your job to have some freedom and flexibility. And so that's one of the boundaries that I have, is I don't take calls on Fridays. So when we think about this concept of belonging, what I encourage you is that as you are reaching out one hand to pull others in and to make them and to give them a sense of belonging, I want you to make sure that you're also reaching your other hand out for your own sense of belonging, that you're also saying, see me, right? I have value, and have value in these ways. And so when we look at each of these steps, these are kind of the questions, right? So are you waiting around for others to include you? What is the story that you're telling yourself? With Ignite, are you using your gifts and your talents? Something I didn't mention. One of the things about me is that I'm extremely sensitive. I'm the friend that cries at the commercials. There's like the one like SPCA commercial where they're singing In the Arms of an Angel. Yeah, I cry at them, right? I used to despise that part of myself. I hated the way that I was so sensitive. But now I realize and I recognize that that is a gift. because I am talking all day to people about racism and homophobia and xenophobia, right? I'm talking about these very sensitive topics. And my gift of sensitivity helps me create that impact so that I am impacting wherever I go. And then finally, I'm teaching people about this work. Yes, that commercial is really hard to watch, isn't it? So as you think about these 5 areas, actually, I'm going to go here because the questions I think are really helpful. Which area would you say that you're strong in, and which area would you say that you could use a little more work in?
For me, it is about confidence. I think so. Walk the walk, talk the talk. For me, I have to repeatedly do things like, for me to be comfortable in front of people, I need to go to open mic nights and read some of my journals or perform and act. When I'm with other artists that I critique, I make sure to speak and not hold in, because I'll go home and be like, man, I should have said that, and I will have trouble going to sleep. What I really am confident, or what I'm strong in, is presenting materials either through graphics or art. I can deliver a message impactfully, and I'm aware of trends and how to use them to leverage social media and things of that nature, and video content. So in those aspects, I would say I'm comfortable behind the scenes, but getting in front of the camera is probably where I need the most work. Thank you.
Sure, thank you. So what I would say is lean into those fears, right? But you have to get in front of the camera more. You have to conquer that fear. I also would want to know, what is the story that you're telling yourself when you're in front of the camera that is causing that fear? Because I guarantee you that the story you're telling yourself is different from what the truth is, right? Especially if you're incredibly critical of yourself like I am. Mauricio agrees and says, he usually says, ugh, I shouldn't have said that. I'm like that all the time. Thank you for sharing, Ralph. Mauricio, you're strong with the igniting yourself to action, but not so strong with instructing. So telling others how to treat you. Is that around boundaries? Do you have a hard time setting boundaries? Yeah. Boundaries are hard. But you know who suffers when we don't set boundaries? It's not the other people. It's not the other people, it's us. And listen, when people give us boundaries, yeah, I'm with you, Mauricio, but let me ask you this question. When people give you boundaries, how do you respond? How do you feel if someone, gives you a boundary? Jenny, thank you. I'm gonna get back to you in a minute. All right, yeah, so you're cool with it. You appreciate the confidence they have in you to tell you. It works the other way as well. When you tell someone a boundary, they're going to be cool with it. They're going to appreciate the confidence you have in them to tell them. The only person you're hurting by not setting those boundaries is you. And I guarantee you that people will respect it. Thank you for sharing. Okay, Jenny's a new nonprofit ED. And so you feel like you're constantly asking others to include you. Are you saying that you're being excluded? And is this by your team members or perhaps other community partners. Give me a little bit more about that. Yeah, you're the new kid on the block. Yep. So how do you, I think, Jenny, that impact would be an important step for you. How can you, impact the space? How can you force them to know and remember who you are so they have no choice but to include you? Yeah. Trust through the organization and with your partners. Yep. What else? And if anyone has any advice for Jenny from your perspective as well, that will be very helpful. Jenny, what are your gifts? What are your talents? What's your, like I like to call, your zone of genius? Conversation. Okay. Charm. Oh, I like it. And first of all, kudos for recognizing your strengths, right? So how do you use your gifts of conversation and charm to make an impact, to build that trust? Lean into those gifts that you have. Because they may not, again, and you have to be confident, because right now your peers may not be including you. You have to continue to include yourself and show them that you belong there. And you should know, everyone, that I still like to dance. I'm still bad at it, but I have, when I do in-person events, I actually dance onto stage. So I have a song, and I will ask, the event planners to play that, and I will dance onto stage before I speak. It's still bad, right? But I am showing that I belong there. And I am showing others that it's okay. Get out here, dance badly, right? But it's now I'm one who is inviting others to dance with me. I've taken that belonging and I've placed it in my control instead of asking to be included. And so those are the two sides of inclusion. I wish we had more time together, but do we have any quick questions or comments as we finish up this talk? I just want to say I appreciate all of you for your participation and your engagement. But any questions or last thoughts as we close out?
It's
Yeah.
Marie Louise. If we have a question that didn't come up in this discussion, can we email you and ask it?
Absolutely. Yep. So my email is on the screen. I know some people may be in their car, so it's simple. It's beth@bethruffin.com. You can shoot me an email, or you can go to bethruffin.com. I have an intake form there, and I'd be happy to answer any outstanding questions you have.
Thank you.
Absolutely. You're welcome.